This is episode number 11 of the series Decolonising Design through Dialogue. This series is possible thanks to the Design History Society, which awarded me the Decolonising Design History Grant. They also advised me on who to interview outside of Latin America, so that this series could have a more international perspective. This series features interviews and projects from India, Argentina, Spain, Ghana, the USA, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Australia, Ecuador, and Paraguay. It is a trilingual series with episodes in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. I interview designers, artists, and researchers. I heard about this episode's guest thanks to Daniel Huppertz. When I interviewed him, he mentioned he was reading Yaw's book. That gave me the idea, why not to interview Yaw together? So in this episode, Daniel joins me as a co-pilot and we chat with Yaw Ofosu-Asare. Yaw is a design researcher from Ghana based in Australia. He wrote the book Decolonising Design in Africa. In this interview, we talk about the book, about language challenges, storytelling, color, and of course, decolonising design, the topic of this series. My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora.
My name is Yaw Ofosu-Asare, and I'm a Ghanaian. I'm West Africa, and I've been in Australia for 5 years. I came here to do my PhD, so yeah, because it was like, oh, I need an English country where I wouldn't need to learn another language, because I did French for 3 years and I never got to learn French. So my name is Yaw, means I was born on a Thursday. So in Ghana, we have this naming system where you are named according to the day you were born. So Monday for a female and a male. So that Thursday is Yaw, and then my dad's name follows. So that interestingly became the reason why I'm in this space now, my name. Because growing up, it was like, what's your English name? Because normally it will be like Frank, Peter, and then you have your Ghanaian name in the middle, and you have your surname. But my dad decided to go the Ghanaian way, which is not unique, but there's a lot of Ghanaians who don't have. But like, you always get the question about, you go to a hospital, you show your ID card, and you're like, oh, is that your name? You enter a new classroom, and the teacher will be like, what's your English name? So as a kid, you just think about those. It's not a big deal. It's like you're the kid with no English name, and you just move on in life. But then when I came to Australia, I remember I was like, I wanted to do a general study about my undergrad was in graphic design. I did a master's of philosophy in education, which I looked in design theories. So I was like, I just want to do a study of graphic design education in Ghana. Like, that was the idea. And then think about how design is taught. And then, I don't know, just sitting there, it came to me like, why do people even care about my name, like my English? Where does that come from? That whole notion of self and having to then identify yourself with an English name. Where did that conversation or with that mindset come from? And I do listen to a lot of Bob Marley. That was probably where I first get this conscious, like the redemption song, like this idea of mental slavery and colonization and how the mind works. So then it started this whole journey of using design to unpack who I am as an African, as a Ghanaian, and really understand. And then it led me to the spaces I grew up, where I grew up in a colonial town. It was like, it's pretty similar to, like, let's say you end up in a Lismore, like you have all this British architecture situated along the beach, because the beach is where everything happens. And you have all these old castles, this trade castle port, where the Danish port, you have a British castle, an English castle. And you also visit, like, you drive around and see all these places where slaves were kept. So this Ghanaian history, and shaped by the political history of Ghana to Pan-Africanism, because Ghana is always, like, Ghana is a bit proud. We are a proud nation. I guess notion of Kwame Nkrumah being the first country to get independence. So there's always this thing boiled up, which obviously I wasn't out till I studied this PhD, and then everything just unfolded, and I was like,
What did you research in your PhD?
So I looked into decolonizing African design in the context of Ghana, and then how to use storytelling, African philosophy, and I talked about identity and selfhood to really understand the formation of schools in Ghana, and then that leads to the formation of art education, and then leads to the formation of design education. So that really then underpins the understanding of design, like how do we design? Because these are schools set up by the missionaries, and then the missionaries then set up begin the formal education, and then using religion and colonization, you then study design, but like outside the confines of what you think about African arts or African design. Is like you go to school, you learn Bauhaus. Because being in arts design school in Ghana, I know the Bauhaus, I know that the Renaissance, the arts movement, but you learn all these things, but you only learn African arts in the context of African arts, never in the context of design. It's like all bundled up in this arts movement without really understanding that African design just emerges from the art. It's just there's no separation between art and design, but like there's also the need to then link all these theories, connect all these thoughts to really then define what design looks like in an African context.
How would you define the concept of decolonizing design?
I think you also think about language, like English language. Like how do you the first thing in the book I try to define design. It's like, what do you mean by design? Because design is basically a plan or a layout of something. Like you're designing, you're trying to plan something, you're trying to lay out something, you're trying to combine something. But we don't have design in the, let's say in the context of Ghana, we don't have a name specifically for design. So we don't have that name. So to even define the term design in a pre-colonial context, because it's everything. But in a post-colonial context, you have design emerging out of the design school. So the first technical school is set up in Accra, Chimota, and then evolved into the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. So that's where the design education comes from. So indirectly then training students with Western design concepts, and then delineating, because the whole education system is just based on this colonial concept of education, trying to refine the Black one, trying to refine the African to be Westernized. So for me, I always say this, it's very simple for me to live in Melbourne than to live in a rural Ghana area, because it's so delineated from who I am. Because I grew up in a big city in Ghana, I'll go to the mall, I'll do everything a Westerner would do, but I'll never. So this detachment from your education, you finish school and then you're so detached from the native. So you no longer feel like you're part of the community. So you're always looking for, it's easy to just fit in a very Western sense. So in terms of the concept of colonial design education, it's just, I guess, that's planning and educating you in a way where you understand design in a very colonial concept. You are not really learning design to really reflect who you are or the lived experience. That's why I have like images, your lived experience, everything you are taught takes you away from who you are as a person, takes you away from your community, takes you away from the people, even the language you use in your work, the images you use, the layout, all these things are detached. They're detaching you from who you are as a native.
Could I ask, one of the things that you mentioned in the book, you talk about design philosophies and general philosophies of life. And there was a term that you used a number of times, Ubuntu. Is that right? Ubuntu?
Yeah, Ubuntu.
As a sort of example that could be maybe a guiding principle for people to think of, when they were designing this way. Maybe you could explain what Ubuntu means and why that is useful.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, because that's basically the philosophy that separates a Westerner, someone European, too. So the Western thinking of rationalization, logic, everything, this capitalizing leads you to a very individualistic society where everybody becomes an individual. There's nothing really like, it's just like this notion of individualism where it comes down for the Protestant movement and everything. So this notion of helping yourself and then getting well, and then you go to heaven. But then in the African society, Ubuntu means you are part of the community. So you are who you are because of where you come from. So this notion of this communal living where it's this relational, like have this relational, like this relationship with the people around you, the environment where you grow up, there's the land, the animal. So just this care for everyone. So you are part of the community. Community protects you, community guides you, and then it's just this selfless need, the selflessness, and it comes from this great the Ubuntu. So the Ubuntus are like there's this great migration from southeastern Africa, and then that's where everybody. So it's like it's a the Bantu people. So this comes from this Bantu where the great migration where it starts from South Africa, East Africa, and then like Africans end up in West Africa. So this philosophy where that's why you see a lot of, even I'm sure you like in Footscray, or you see a lot of these like communities where they really close-knit communities, they really gel together, but because there's like the child belongs to the community. You are part of this community. The community is there to protect you. And it's not just a relationship between human beings. It's always a relationship between how do you care for the animals you have around you, because like how do you care for the people? How do you care for the environment? So this communalness is what defines Ubuntu. There's the tension there now. So it's like the Western versus the Ubuntu system. Where do you go? And then I think the tension also comes from how you measure success. So now you have a kind like, do you measure success by capitalist gains where you have money, you are happy as the individual, or you measure success by the community happiness where everybody is like happy, lives in the community. It's not defined by money. So it's the base. It's a very core concept in a lot of African society where you are not by yourself. You're always protected by your community.
And how then could we explain that in design terms? Like, what is perhaps an example of a concrete, designed object or outcome which embodies this philosophy? Is there?
Yeah. So if you think about, let's say, if you go to an African home and you have the pots or a chair, it's even though it's a pot and a chair and a functional reason to sit on it and enjoy. It also serves like there's also a spiritual aspect of that pot. It's used for spiritual event. It also serves as part of the community. So your neighbor can come and use the pot. It's like this. So even with the houses, if you look at a lot of African houses, it's very secular. So in Ghanaian, the traditional house is a very secular, where it's the family around it. And the middle part is always the kitchen, because the woman dictates everything. So the woman sits in the middle and then looks at everything and just, those are the practical things where you feel it's like it's just dictates the way of life and everything, like even in terms of fashion design, in terms of when you're having funerals, like the procession, the performative aspect, everything is just dictated by this notion about you're not by yourself. Let the community help you. Let's help. Let's do it together. Which is sadly being eroded, but like it's still a very core part of who we are.
One question, because I know, I'm sure you know that there is an open source community called Ubuntu, no? So they took this open source community, took the name of Ubuntu in order to show this communal self. So could you say that also this type of communities making something for the common good, that could be this type of things, even if they are software, they could be embracing this philosophy?
Yeah, I think it's a philosophy that it's good. Like there's a community where it's open source. I think it's a philosophy, not just I think it's underplayed a bit, because I like in terms of theory, like I'm theorizing how an Ubuntu economic system works, like how Ubuntu education system works, like how Ubuntu design theory will look like. So I think for me, one of the biggest struggle with like being in the space of decolonizing and just it's like this, it's like we're looking at it from a very aesthetic perspective rather than looking at it from a more methodological perspective, where it's the method of how you do it. It's not really about making it open. How do you make it? Is it in consultation with the people? So I don't know much about the open space, but like, is it in consultation with the community? Are you there helping them being co-researchers? or you're this extractive where you just go there because you are bored. At Fanon will say like you are bored with your concrete and your nice Melbourne cities. You're just bored. You don't know anything to do. So you just go into this community and extract data without really having a relation out with them. So it's a good concept where, so this like openness where everybody's accepted, everybody's nice to you, like you just come in and you're part of the community and the community helps you. And yeah, so how that sits in design is something I could always explore.
So tell me concretely what you have done in, you are a professor, so you are teaching, what you have done in your classes in order to decolonize design, in order to bring these ideas.
Yeah, it's hard. It's not because the curriculum and the teaching, it's the lesson plans already mostly design. Because I teach I've taught in Melbourne Uni. I'm teaching in RMIT now. It's not, you can't just go in there and like just grab everything, just start put it just because you are this person. It's just, there's a standard, it's a Western standard, and I appreciate that. It's not a bad system. It's where it works fine. It's fine. But at the same time, I think even me being in the classroom in the first place, it's a bit of it's a disruption in itself, because I'm presenting very different ideas from how these students are taught. I'm trying to tell them, don't just look at Western concept, don't just look at the Bauhaus. How have you considered other people? Have you considered the modern human? Have you considered the post-humanist? How are you collecting your, like if you are designing a poster, how are you collecting, how are you understanding the audience? Are you just going there and just looking at them and say, okay, they need this? Are you talking to, do I understand? Do you have this empathy to understand that relational conversation with them and say, these are what I think they need? And respect. I think respect is also a big part of being a designer, respecting who you are designing for and understanding these things. So it's not, I wouldn't say I go into the classroom and I just bombard them, because it's very hard to do it when you're situated in a structure where it determines who you are. I think I'll have much more freedom in my research to really implement, and this will then lead into scholarship, because I'm having a conversation with them about you need to look at the Aztecs, you need to look at Colombian design, you need to look at not just Africa, even look at these different things and trying to bring them into your work. Understand that you're not just design for a Western, like there's so much out there you could be looking at, how, and also a big part of storytelling, just understanding that you need to listen, you need to then convey, you need to tell the story of the people you are designing for.
But are you bringing your students to the territory and working there with them?
Mind you, I'm a very early in my career. I finished my PhD a year plus month ago. So I'm sure, Daniel, you know how universities in Australia work. It's not like if I had a PhD student who was supervised, obviously, yeah, if I'm supervising, obviously that would be good in your work. I'm part of community advocacy groups, and I talk about these work. I've given presentation at Uni Melbourne where I talk about my work in terms of African Union, because one thing which is also very interesting is, even though the person is African or Black, these are not concepts that readily comes to you, because even radicalized in the education system, which I've already talked about, for you to look at things a very different way, for you to appreciate the fact that the Western capitalism has led to the result of Australia build this beautiful country. So how do I come in and tell you you could do things differently and it will work? It was like, no, but like I see this beautiful country and I go back home and I don't see the beauty. But like it's like this whole thing of, so it's I think maybe going forward it's an ongoing work. I'm young, I'm here, I'm learning, I'm writing the book. I was having this conversation with my friend, and my friend also asked me the same question. How do we get it out there? I was like, share it. Like at this point, all you could share, and then let the knowledge be out there. Let people have these conversations, and then slowly but surely we'll get, because I don't know if because if you think about Africa, post-independence, these conversations were there. Post-independence, you had writers like Chinua Achebe, Ngugi wa Kongo, Frank Fanon. In the 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, post-independent, there was this vibrantness of trying to decolonize the Black person. You have the civil rights movement, you have like all these, like this really strong need. But then you get to the 70s, 80s, and you have the Cold War and just shut everything down. Economically, politically, there's so much political instability. It's the desegregation, and it brings so much problems. And then you have probably like 30 years of unstable democracy, wars. So you are not having this conversation. The conversation shifts because it's like Cold War thing. And then you have the 90s, and it opens up. So this is where we come in, like myself, I'm born in the 90s to parents who could afford to buy me a certain type of books, play certain type of music, because you have a liberal economy, and then it's importation of music, culture, stuff. And then I am now in there, and then having this conversation, and so it's everything is in context, and I'm sure it will happen.
Yeah, I'm just following up from that. In design terms, in your books, you brought up a lot of examples, not only from Ghana, but from Nigeria and other South Africa, in terms of different practitioners and practices that were using both traditional ways of doing things, but also, I guess, drawing upon their Western education. Do you think would it be fair to say there's a bit of a renaissance of design in Africa, of people that maybe have grown up with the Western education and yet have gone back to these different community ideas around storytelling and co-creation that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, exactly the point I was trying to make, that everything ties into the socio-economic struggles there. So it's still post-independence, still a young continent. Ghana is 67 years, and so is this where then like 60s, 70s, 80s, it's really the dark times, and then you get this ushering of people who really want really want to change. So you have a very beautiful continent, and people are always having this conversation. So in Nigeria, in South Africa, especially South Africa has a lot of these conversations going on about decolonizing. And then you come to Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and with the advent of social media, you have all these things, this conversation coming up. So there's this big renaissance where people are really like, even me having this conversation in itself, it's part of the whole movement. So yeah, I would say there's a renaissance. So because like I said, like in terms of we are not having this conversation in the 80s, but like in the 60s, obviously there was this movement. There was this right after independence was this really neat. So there was this a lot of experimentation in different economic systems. So you have Tanzania trying the Ujuma system, where they're trying to build an economic system based on the Ubuntu movement. And you have Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah talking about neo-colonization, where the West still controls this. So all this then seeps into design, art, how cities are built. Like the 60s, you look at architecture, uses like strong movement, like the Russian style, the brute type movement, trouble, and then now we have the 90s, where it's very westernized, very European style. So all these things are all shaping up, so all coming, like we're just mixing those. And then you have like your Western education, and you are confronted with language, art, design, images, visual images, and then the graphic design, how powerful these things are. And you're trying to communicate to people who, first of all, so the language is a big barrier, the visual images, and trying to present. Yeah. So this, yeah.
Yeah. To come back to the more design philosophy and how it plays out in different objects and materials, you mentioned in the second book this idea that I thought was really fascinating of an ontological understanding of color. That is, I guess, in a Western context, blue is just blue, and you could have dark blue or light blue. But what you're suggesting there is that a color, something that we in a Western context might just say that's just blue, there's a lot more to it in perhaps a Ghanaian context.
Yeah. In an African context, blue is feminine. It's like there's this like whole notion of color, like the color of the which that's one of the chapters I really found exciting to write. Even writing about blackness and how blackness, like the notion of blackness, is perceived as evil, and that leads to this notion of to describe as a black person, then subconsciously become an evil person. And you have red, because everything is so tied into the spiritual. Everything is tied to the lived experience, the color, like if a woman wears blue, like blue, there's a deep meaning behind it. Every fashion cloth, it's so symbolic. Everything people do, they are very careful in picking these colors. Like, so when someone dies, it's supposed to wear red, and then you wear black and you wear white. So the first part of the funeral, we wear red. The second part, we wear black. And then the last part is celebration of the life, where you wear white. So this symbolic notion of this deep, and it's all tied to the spiritual, it's all tied to the community, like symbolism, where in the Western concept, blue is blue, as you said, white is white. You wear white, you wear black. But like in an African, like let's say if you were to wear black 5 days a week in Ghana, people ask you, well, what is wrong? Is there a problem there? Why are you wearing black? Did someone die? But here, like in Australia, you can, like most of you wear in the chrome, most of the colors you see is very dark, black, blue, black. Yeah. But in Ghana, you wear black for 3 days and someone will stop you and ask you, is everything okay? Are you sure? Have you lost someone? Is someone there? And then you wear white and someone will stop you and say, are you celebrating something? So you wear white when there's celebration, there's childbirth, so there's this. So it's all like a lot happening, and I feel like for us as Africans, we need to start connecting these dots, and define it, and that would then define who you are. And then we have so much to celebrate, and then we need to. I think the problem is always the economics of everything. How do you sell these ideas? How do you then make these practical economic decisions that will bring in resources to people and say, okay, we need to then carry this forward?
And I guess from a Western context, Africa in design terms has maybe always been seen as a place where, economically, but in design terms as well, you extract ideas, extract wealth. So from Picasso with, the African masks to the Benin bronzes, take them out and put them in the museums around the world without understanding any of those kind of levels of meaning which you suggested.
Yeah, exactly. This is like this extraction, just always taking, not really being relational and having a conversation, and then using religion to then say these are primitive. At the same time, trying to critique these things are primitive, uncivilized ways of knowing, because you don't understand, because you've gone there with this science, like you because the West has gone through all this like Renaissance, rational logic thinking, scientific method. So you go there having this, you need to know the problem, you need to understand your introduction, write your research question, you do your understanding of the literature review, and then you just go and talk to people and write your results. So there's the whole notion of science. But then it's like the need to do ethnographic, where you are really sitting with people and really understanding what is happening. I think this extraction is this extraction without meaning. So really, it's very sad. I always find it very interesting. For me, one of the dumbest or the like thing I struggle with racism. I was like, why? Like, what has this thing done to you for you to just go in there and think and take advantage without helping people? And then when it becomes a problem, you then turn around and say, these people are a problem.
This episode is part of the lists Decolonizar, Australia y Diseño, D&D in English, y Diseño y Territorio. The titles of the lists are in Spanish, but each list contains episodes in English. The D&D in English list includes all the episodes published in English. So far, we have more than 35 episodes available. Over time, we've been building a solid collection, and if this is your first time listening to us, now you know there is plenty more to explore. Yaw points out something really important. When we talk about decolonizing design, there is a risk that we might just end up flipping the hierarchies, putting those who were on the top now at the bottom. But that's not what we want. The goal isn't to swap who holds the power, but to make sure that we don't keep marginalizing certain voices. What we really want is to create spaces that are more equal and embrace diversity. In design, we've been working on inclusion and diversity for quite some time, especially focusing on accessibility for people with different needs, like those who are visually impaired, colorblind, and others. And that's obviously super important, but we haven't put nearly as much effort into understanding cultural diversity or questioning how often, without realizing it, we keep reinforcing practices and perspectives that come from the global north. Practices that can exclude other ways of seeing and doing things. In other words, we need to look beyond just technical inclusion and start asking ourselves, who are we leaving out when we design? Whose voices, knowledge, or traditions aren't we listening to? How can we make design truly reflect the diversity of the people who use it? Not just functionally, but culturally, in how they experience the world. Decolonizing design isn't just about adding more seats at the table, it's about changing how we build the table and who we invite to sit at it. And I think that's still a challenge we need to face in many spaces. Let's continue listening to Yaw, that he has much more to tell us. You went to Australia to do your doctoral degree. So how do you find it different in Australia, this type of decolonized design?
Yeah, I think Australia presents a very interesting, it's very interesting because Australia has its own problem with indigenousness and trying to define Australia as a country and its own identity, trying to find its path as who's an Australian is a big question here. Like who's an Australian? What's the Australian culture? We follow the multicultural path. It's being white what defines you as an Australian. So Australia presents those dynamics, which is very interesting for me being the outsider and observing and saying, oh, okay, they are having all their own conversation, which sometimes becomes very, like, you could tell it's not very, so Australia, it's not very outward because everything is like people really look within without really saying, oh, what is the word saying? It's a very, so it presents those dynamics and it really helps. It's also observing that from the outside that really helps to understand the universality of the Black experience. It's not just, as soon as your color is different from, then you have a problem in the world. There's this universality of the concept, and you could tell a lot of the similarity. You could feel a lot of similarities from the experiences, even the clan system, the family systems, and how Indigenous also define their clan system, and then how they are also very communal in their ways of being. So that's one very important observation living in Australia. Always you look at it, it's like, okay, there's this universality, this is what's happening. Even though I try as much as possible not to enter those spaces because I don't feel I am qualified enough or have the enough understanding to really be respectful enough to have those conversations anymore. So I try as much as possible not to really enter those spaces. But at the same time, from the outside, I look at it, it's like, okay, this even the term Indigenous is very, because as soon as you say the term Indigenous in Australia, everybody thinks you're talking about Indigenous people, but like it's also an universal term where you could also define a lot of natives and Indigenous. So Australia then present those, and it's a lovely multicultural country, and then especially living in Melbourne, the food, the people, everybody's you barely see anyone. So that I guess it's a good foundation for me to begin understanding who I am in the first place. So that's where understanding me as a Black, it's like at the same time, you cannot run away from the economic realities where you're afforded the opportunity, the resources to learn and study and have time to have this conversation.
But when you are teaching design in Australia, you have been teaching in Australia and in Ghana. What's the difference?
I guess, first of all, the resources. There's a lot of more resources here. You enter a class now, the students are using MacBooks, which is not, you're not going to get that in Ghana where students just flip up their MacBooks and start working there with Adobe. And then I think in terms of creativity, in terms of it's not really different. They all want to do well. They're trying very hard. And in terms, I guess it's also in terms of even the class sizes. Yeah, you can't teach more than 20 a studio class, like up to 20 students, or maybe 25. I'm not really sure, but I remember when I was doing graphic design, then my class was like 60 people. So I was teaching when I was teaching high school, I had a class of 50, 60 students. So how do you cater for all these students and make sure you're available to them? So that himself, and then in terms of the curriculum, it's not really different in terms of, it's not really, because we do the basic principles of design, and then you end up designing for doing packages, you're doing posters, you understand, magazines. So the foundations are very similar. It's very similar in how it's structured. It's just unfortunate that in Africa we are not tying back to who we are. So we are not looking at our African practice and say, this is what makes you unique. This is how your design can be unique. How do we learn from, let's say, the Japanese, the Chinese? How have we been able to link who they are? You've connected all the dots, and then you have presented with a concept like minimalism. Like, how do you connect all those dots and then present an African concept? Because plastering painted symbols and craft symbols on things is very easy to do, but like, how does it translate into method? So I guess it's where that's really the difference. And in terms of, I guess it also speaks to the problem of resources. Maybe if there was enough resources and enough time, people will afford their minds to these problems and trying to solve them. But it's not in terms of research, like how much research grants goes in there, how much of these lecturers really have time to deal. If you are dealing with 60 students every 3 months, do you have time to be doing these things? So it also has its positive where it creates a big community. You have a lot of class and you have this big community, you're learning off each other. And then you have like this, because in Australia, you don't stay on campuses. Like you go in there, you go home, you go in there, you go home. Unless you travel from a small town, you move to Melbourne, and then you live in the colleges, or like in Ghana, the communities, the universities are in self communities. So you build this, you become who you are through this, you build this long life friendship, and become this exciting journey where you are learning from people. Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question that, I thought you asked yourself in the book, which was one of the risks you suggested of decolonizing design was this idea that there was a hierarchy, whereas previously the Western design and education was up here, and say African design, Indigenous ideas down here. And you suggested there is a risk there of just simply flipping that hierarchy. And I just wonder if you had any more thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think it's something I really think about, because like I have the debate with people all the time. It's just like, okay, so what do we do? Like, it's like, what do we do? Questions like, okay, you're saying all these things. What do we do? I think there's room for a hybrid system. There's a room. I think there's a conversation to be had about building a world where everybody feels like they belong to the world, not just building a world where we only have one set of people who think their world is theirs, without really building a world. So we need to build a hybrid system where we could just fit in. You could build a system where, especially in an African context or a Black context, where you're not going and saying, okay, all the Western, like it's the Bauhaus, everything you've learned is wrong. It's like, how do we fits. It's like what they've been able to do with Christianity in African context. You still have your music, your dancing, your drumming, your shouting, your dressing up, but still situated in a Christian concept. But you come to Australia, that's not how churches are practiced. You just go in there, a bit of singing, it's like 2:10, 1 hour, you are done. I'm sure even in a Catholic Argentinian system, like you go there, this is like a vibrant celebration of, and this is similar to what we like rituals or festivals or celebrations. Just like they've been able to bridge the two. So just this, not building a hierarchy, but at the same time trying to build a hybrid system where you have everything happening in connection with each other. So you have the African system, the Indigenous system, the Black system, and then you also have the Western. You bridge them together. So how does a city, Accra, look like with those systems? Because how does the kiosk look like? And it even presents new ways of doing things, new ideas, and it's much more. And then you build a world where you have this belong, where everybody fits like they are part of the world and this community, not just a concept where we have to fit in one way or everything else it's a failure. I think I'm not really good with mentioning like authors name, but like this is something I think Hami Baba like proposed this hybrid third space. Even Pablo Ferb proposed this third space where we could all coexist and build society from more.
What would you recommend? What are you reading, watching, listening that you would like to recommend in relation to decolonizing design?
In as much as a creative person, you're always looking for the creative way. I think especially you need to understand the theories behind who we are. I think first of all, you need to read more on the philosophy and the theory of things and how things are. Like how do we manage to get here in the first place?
But do you want to recommend us something special, some other Ghanaian designer or African designer that we should be reading, watching, listening?
Like I think I love books. So the book is like Black Marks, Black Skin, White Marks. Yeah, that's Frank Fanon. And then Wretched of the Earth. And then those who underpin who you are, those who will open up your mind to, oh, okay, this is what's happening in the world. These are the things that happen, and this is why I remember reading Black Skin, White Marks. Like, I see why I am the way I am. Like nothing is it's not in value. Like you've been shaped up to be this person, to think this way and do this way. And Wretched of the Earth will just open up the space for how the colonizer and the native coexist and how the relationship between the two. And in terms of it was like this Pablo Ferb, like all those like post-colonial authors, like Decolonising Minds by Ngugi Watongo, which is also good. The use of language in itself as a colonial tool, because you are using words to define concepts that are not in the same language. So in terms of, we talked about defining design, like all these things, and saying, because a proverb in an African setting is a whole theory in itself, but like it's called a proverb, and it limits to it's being a proverb. Or even when I talked about my name, so my name is titled. So every day of the day is a soul. So it's like your soul name. But like if you translate it to Ghana, it's more than a soul. That word is not, the meaning is not a soul. It's more than a soul. So reading those books to really, as a designer, to really understand, as an African or a Black person, even anyone, to really understand, oh, okay, these are the problems I have. I need to really think about this concept. And then in practice, there's this Burkinabe architecture called the Bedo Francisca's work. He does a lot of work in architecture. He built a school, so he works a lot in community-based architecture work. Also, in terms of practice, there's even going to be a conference in Ghana in September about design, and I think it's called DEX. So DEX Ghana is a big design conference. I think it started in the last 3 or 4 years. So just having this, so this is like a group of young people who've come together and created a design conference, and I think it's now the biggest conference in Ghana. So it's going to happen in September. So I guess having them in a room and just going there and say, hey guys, like I know you are really good at design and you could do amazing stuff, but like how do we solve these wicked problems we have? How do we bring everybody involved? Don't just design because for the capitals, we don't design. For someone in Lagos, Accra, Kinshasa, Yaoundé, or it's easy for them to grasp these Western because they are open to. But then, how do we bring the people from the rural area who all feel part like they're totally a nation or society? So these are the people. But like first of all, it's important to really read these things and understand these concepts.
So in the future, where do you want to shift your practice?
I think for me, in the future, I think I'm always tempted not to plan too far ahead because things are happening so fast. Sometimes I don't want to box myself into this. Like, I need to get this now. I think everything. I guess wanted is happening. It's happening so fast, and sometimes it is so. Sometimes when you really have a strict plan, sometimes you don't see the opportunity that comes from the other side. So, but in terms, I think going forward, I think I want these theories, these books to be translated in practice. I want to see how these play out in practical sense, how design becomes a big part of the government policy in like a nudge theory, like nudging people into spaces where you don't go to Accra and see people walking on the street, being on the street and like this. And then every 4 years you need to clear them out because you need to have a nice, but how do we build for those problems? So how this concept becomes practical concept. And I have a project. I got a seed grant from my research, being a research fellow. So I'm looking into designing safe spaces for people with disability and how those safe spaces will look like. I'm trying to use like Afrofuturism and decolonizing methodologies to really create spaces and see, okay, when there's a climate disaster, how does community involved and what do they think a safe space should look like, and how do even like the resilience and after the post flood, how do we help? So I think I'm much more interested in like things that really help. So I've also been planning to set up like street libraries because that's a concept I found in Australia, which I found very nice, where you have like these small boxes of books around, and then people just go and pick it up for you. So that's something I really want to do. And then just continue the conversations and continue writing about decolonizing and trying to get the word out there, people to understand that these are things we need to consider and these are things we need to do. I think it's pretty early in my postdoc career, so it's challenging at times. It's a very competitive space, so it's really hard. But like I think things are going on well and everything is like in motion. So
okay, best of luck for you and your work, and thanks a lot for the interview. We reached the end of this series, and as always, we'd like to hear what you thought about it. Personally, I found this series super interesting, not only because of the range of places our guests were speaking from, but also because several ideas kept coming up, even though each person experiences them in their own way. One thing that became very clear is that there is no single way to do decolonial design. Rather, there are many ways to understand and practice decoloniality. Depending on the context, in each place, decoloniality is felt and lived differently. Decolonial design always goes hand in hand with collaboration and respect for Indigenous cosmologies. That's why many of the conversations we've had with designers working with Indigenous communities, the ones in the Design and Territories list, could also easily fall under the category of decolonial design. Another recurring theme is the connection with nature. Design for the planet, design for the modern human, for life, sustainable design, all these practices intersect with decolonial design because Indigenous cosmologies place life and nature at the center. When I started this series, I thought I'd find something completely new in the ideas of decolonial design, but the truth is that while the perspective is different, the themes are familiar. sustainable design, working with indigenous communities, design for life, or for the planet. Now we want to hear from you. Was there anything that surprised you or made you think your own design practice? Do you have any experience with decolonial design you'd like to share? How do you see the relationship between design, territory, and nature in your own work? Tell us the comments or send us a message through our social media channels. As always, the music of the podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman. The sound design is by Julian Pereira. This podcast is published with Creative Commons license with attributions. This is Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us on our social media channels in YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, or Blue Sky, or visit our website. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.